what I'd like to do now is hand over to our wonderful speakers. I don't think I need to give them too much of an introduction. McGee and Emma are both colleagues of mine. So McGee is a fellow director of Weave and a content strategist. Emma is our design strategist who joined us 2 years ago, about 2 years, coming up for 2 years ago, and we can't imagine the place without her. And McGee and Emma are going to be talking about content design systems and really sharing a lot of insights from a big and significant state sort of whole of government project that they did for a state government client, which has kind of, I think, applications not just for government and certainly not just for state government, but for all kinds of organisations that manage large ecosystems of content. So that's probably enough from me. Do feel free to, we'll have a chance for questions at the end, but feel free to just stick questions in the comments or in the chat rather as we go. And other than that, I think I'm ready to hand over to McGee and Emma. So I'm just going to stop sharing and over to you two.
Thanks, Angus. Hi everyone. Emma's going to share. She's going to be the driver, and I'll be talking, and she'll be trying to keep up. If we get out of sync, that'll be why. But yeah, it's really nice to see everyone. It's so lovely to see so many friends and familiar faces as well. So yeah, thank you for joining us. Cool. Okay, so as Angus mentioned, I'm McGee and this is my colleague Emma. And we're here today to talk to you a bit about content design systems. We are doing this through the lens of government because that is where we've been working. But what we're saying here, as Angus said, is kind of, we think it's pretty true of anyone who's managing a big digital web ecosystem. Yeah, so before we kind of talk about content design systems, so I think it's helpful to talk about why you should care about a content design system and what it's kind of potentially going to help you solve for. So we think that they make your job easier whether or not you're a content person, a developer, a designer, or kind of on the business side. And that is because everything is changing. But at the same time as everything is changing, kind of nothing is changing. So the content landscape is changing a lot, but a lot of the constraints and barriers that we've had in the content world are still here. So if we look firstly at what's changing. So if we look at kind of government websites as an example of this, but again, I think it's really true of anyone who's been a mature digital organization in the world for the last kind of 20 years, is that we are kind of handling ever more kind of larger and complex sites, right? Government sites are typically mega sites, which are sites that have thousands or even tens of thousands of pages. And when you have that many pages, there are inherent wayfinding and findability challenges that can be really hard to solve for. So if you think about that massive kind of mega site that tends to be the core of kind of anyone's digital web presence, they are also often made more complex by the fact that they're sitting now within really mega digital ecosystems. So if you're thinking through government, that might be a kind of primary government website along with like a separate services site, a semi-public kind of intranet for transparency, microsites for campaigns, sites for initiatives, agencies that have their own websites. And what all of this means is that we are handling a lot of content. So as we're handling this content, this is made more challenging by the other change, which is that AI is obviously fundamentally changing the content landscape that we're working in. So Jacob Nielsen from the Nielsen-Norman Group describes AI as the first UI paradigm shift in 60 years. And we know it's a big shift, but why he's calling it a UI shift is because it really, really changes the way that we kind of interact and interface with information. So content that we used to create, we could have an expectation that someone was going to read it. When we put all of this work into it, someone on the other end is going to try and make sense of it. But that's not the case anymore, right? Now, it is the infrastructure from which AI systems are going to be reading, interpreting, and returning answers to people, increasingly maybe without them even seeing that piece of content that we've written in the first place. So I'm sure you've all seen data like this, but I just want to go over some recent ones that have stood out for me because the pace of this change is actually so fast. So first of all, there are now AI overviews on 58% of Google search results. So more searches than not will have an AI summary on them. And when people see those AI overviews, they are way less likely to click through. I mean, this is so significant that even Albo is kind of talking about it in his AI, strategy. But, people, the expectation that they're going to go through that website to read the information, obviously really different now. So the rates of that is like 26% will basically end that browser session at that point, as opposed to like 16% who would, click through. So the other behavior change, though, is that many people are turning to AI tools themselves in place of search, right? So there was a recent search survey on search behavior by this agency called 802. And what they found was that 37% of users are actually starting the search in an AI tool rather than a search engine. And when they asked people why, 62% of them said it's because they provide summaries rather than a kind of list of links to website that they then have to process. So there's like less friction between the answer that they're looking for and the question. 60% of respondents said that AI answers are better, clearer, more helpful, and easier to understand. And 63% say that they expect to use AI more next year. And 59% believe it's going to become their main way of finding information. So this is a huge shift. We've got massive, big ecosystems, these kind of evolved, big kind of ecosystems of content. And then we've also got this like really transformative AI kind of landscape. And what all of this means, in the word of the lovely Tori Sanderson, if you know her from the consultancy Avian, is that AI tools are kind of mediating your relationship with your customers now. And that person who would have landed on your page and read it may not see it. Their first and sometimes only interaction with your content is potentially going to happen through AI tooling that has read it, interpreted it, and decided what to surface. So at the same time, though, as all of this is changing, hey, Tori's here, hiya. Okay, so at the same time as everything is changing, though, some things are staying the same. So the first is that there is pretty much always, almost never, enough resource investment in content resourcing and governance in government, or anywhere probably, but definitely in government. Managing content at this scale is genuinely really hard, but it's also made harder by the fact that government content teams are often chronically under-resourced relative to the volume of content that's under management. They're often managing thousands of pages per person across many, many sites, right? And the result of this, by necessity, is that effort has to go to the stuff that's new in your kind of content pipeline and not on what's already there and making sure it's all kind of living up to the kind of current standards. And so you get content debt just kind of quietly like accumulating in the background. So for many big organizations, another problem that we have to deal with that is the same is that every page is a snowflake, right? So you might have 10,000 pages in your kind of web system, but many or even most of them are probably sitting in something like a standard page or a basic page CMS template, right? And when your CMS kind of gives you only one template to work from, like one standard page to work from, and each page is then kind of treated differently, every page becomes a one-off creation. There's no repeatable structure. Every page is a bit of a snowflake. And when every page is a snowflake, it is really, really hard to make changes at scale. So when you add that kind of lack of structure of content, and then you also add the kind of low resourcing for governance, what naturally happens is you get this kind of effect where the same types of information get treated differently depending on who creates it. So this often happens because you've got different people creating content in different parts of the organization who are trying to work within the kind of area of priorities that they have or their preferences, or solve what they can see are wayfinding issues, or work within constraints with the CMS, right? But this has a big impact because across sites, users start to encounter information that's structured in different ways, uses different UI components, or has like massive variations in tone. Things that look the same are not the same. Things that are the same end up kind of looking different. They shape shift between different areas of the site. And so users have to work really hard to figure out what is the same, what's different, and why. And so do machines. So Jeff Eaton calls this the here be dragons problem. I love this quadrant. I just think it's like a really great illustration of the reason why we have to think about structure. But when you have every page being handled individually and they're all kind of unique and unstructured, everything is so hard to change. So it's not that it's not okay to have custom dev. It's not that it's not okay to have kind of custom approaches and unique approaches to content, but you really need to only do that when you're working in small volumes, right? Because there's always going to be a lot of work to manage that. When you have a high volume of content and the structure is unrepeatable, then you get a kind of monster of a content ecosystem to manage, right? And a mountain of content debt to sit on top of. And that's because you can't make changes at scale, right? You can't organize and improve cohorts of pages. You have to improve each one individually, right? So this is almost always the situation in government ecosystems. And it's been really, really hard to get people to care about that in the past, because dealing with that volume of content debt is really hard. It's really slow, and it's also really, really expensive to fix. If you attended the meetup, though, a few months ago, you would have heard Rahel Bailey talk about going to tech conferences and finding that engineering teams are now the ones raising content debt as a kind of urgent issue that needs to be fixed. And for the first time ever, it's not just the content people who are kind of saying, hey guys, we need to deal with content. But it's other teams, including tech teams, because that unstructured and inconsistent content is a significant problem for AI tools, right? Content people have always known it's a problem, but now kind of everyone's starting to care about it. So this is a great opportunity for us to start fixing it. So the more content you have on a topic that isn't specific and targeted, that only kind of loosely covers the same thing from different angles, and that's repeated, the less accurate responses from AI returns become. The less control you have over your own AI tooling, right? The less structure that there is, the less control you have over things like RAG systems that have retrieval guardrails over your source content. So basically with AI kind of changing the landscape we're in, we can't really just ignore content debt anymore. We can't just sit on top of thousands of snowflake pages and hope that the right information gets surfaced. And so this is kind of the shift at the core of what we want to talk about today. And it's the shift that makes content design systems really important. And this is because we need to stop thinking about content as a collection of web pages and start thinking about it as infrastructure. So our websites are now the kind of structured body of information, the content corpus that users and increasingly AI tools depend on. Structure is what allows us to control that content corpus. It's what allows us to retrieve only certain types of content in AI tools. It's what allows us to guide those tools on how to respond. It's what makes everything manageable and coherent for machines as well as for humans. Cool. So let's talk about how content design systems can help. So typically, content design systems document style decisions, and sometimes they're integrated into a UI design system. And these are obviously really valuable tools for us as writers, but also for AI tools that you want to make sure are writing according to a house style. However, the questions that we need to ask now as content designers and strategists are changing, because when we treat content as infrastructure, the key questions that we have are less about what does this page look like or what words should I use. It needs to be, what type of information is this? What does a user need from it? How does it fit consistently within the system? and how can it be best structured to be found and understood and managed by humans as well as retrieved by AI tools? And what is the right kind of documentation to help us do that? So we started thinking, rather than as a kind of content design system, of content design systems thinking. And by this, we mean the choices that we're making about the content infrastructure that we're working with. So to kind of take this out of the theory and bring it to some practical kind of examples, we thought we would share with you some of the work that we have done for a state government client that we worked with. So their website was the 10,000 pages. And so to tackle this, we ran a pilot project across a part of the site that we could then kind of scale up for this work. And we took a very bottom-up approach to the way that we did this, as we always do. And we were very lucky to collaborate with a very forward-thinking, like lovely client team who had a vision and kind of trust to make this work. Okay, so when we take a content design systems thinking approach, we kind of need to do a few things. So firstly, we need to look at, we need to come up from a page level, and we need to look at the whole ecosystem of content that we're dealing with. So not just the bit that's in front of us right now, but actually the whole thing. So even though we were running this as a pilot, we were doing it with reference to the entirety of the system. So second, we need it to be grounded in meaning. And for us, this means that we spent quite a bit of time trying to understand the inherent information qualities of the system and what patterns there were across those information needs. And we do this through an object-oriented UX process, which you might be familiar with because we've had Sophia Prater here to talk about us, to talk to everyone about what that process looks like. And then we also need to document that thinking in frameworks and repeatable patterns that can allow us to be consistent and scalable in the decisions that we're making across these like really big ecosystems of content, because a lot of people and machines will need to be able to understand and follow this thinking, and we also need it to endure, and this helps us to make sure that that endurance happens. And lastly, all of this thinking needs to be kind of cohesive and interconnected, because that's the systems thinking kind of part of it. So next, Emma and I are going to show you some practical examples of that thinking. Okay, so the first thing we did was we created rules for where things live across this big digital ecosystem that we were dealing with. So one of the challenges of these big kind of mega ecosystems is that there is so much duplication across sites and different choices being made about what lives where. And we needed to be able to create kind of organizing principles for where everything lived, when new sites could be built, and what information could be on them and stuff like that, and whether there were like technical constraints and permissions that should change. So we needed to make rules, though, that meant that both people and machines could kind of understand what the right source of truth was and what relationship they had to each other. So to do this, we got a list of all of the websites. So there would have been maybe 200 to 300 websites, and then we worked with stakeholders to understand the intent behind those different websites and why they were being created, so that we could understand what the organizing principles of the ecosystem should be. One of the most helpful activities we did for this was we ran an in-person card sorting workshop with around 45 stakeholders. And when I say card sorting, what we did was like a website sorting thing where we printed out all of these websites and we got people to organize them according to like what principles, why they were different or similar. And we asked everyone to explain why they'd organize them that way. And we found two themes kind of emerging from that. So from that, we felt that one of the themes was the voice, so who was speaking, and whether it was the government or whether it was a different kind of body. And the second was the type of information and its proximity to what people described as core government information and services. So those two things became the key kind of organizing principles of a zone system that we then created as part of like a whole of government framework. So this is what that ended up looking like. So we captured it as a kind of zone system. And what you can see is that there is a kind of the primary website sits at the core of the zone. That's like zone 1. And we did a bit of work defining what core was, which I'll share in a second. And then we also had kind of zones that sat outside of that were about the connected kind of website. So the 2 organizing principles were the voice, which formed the kind of distinction between the first 3 and the last 2. And then we also had kind of proximity to core information, being the how kind of central to how highly kind of authorized that information was. And there are rules around that, which I'll explain in a moment. Okay, so why this worked was that it helped create kind of clear rules for information and where it lived, so that when new sites were created, people kind of knew whether or not they could be created. Part of this was about trying to control some of the proliferation of websites that often happens in organizations like this. The second thing is it allows people to kind of learn where information lives if it's spread over multiple sites. It also helps us to create guardrails around which sites should be referred to for certain types of information for AI tooling. And it also helps to create boundaries around what goes on the core kind of primary website. And this ended up being really important. So I want to talk a little bit more about those boundaries and why they're important. But to illustrate this, I'll share a story. And it's about this page. So I'm just going to give you a minute to read the page or to scan through that page. So this is a real page from a state government website, and it's about how to brush your teeth. We came across this. You noticed a spelling error there, Aiden. Okay, so we came across this page and a lot of others like it when we were auditing this website. And I think that this page kind of raises quite a few questions, like, who is this page for? Why would someone use this page? How would they get to it? And I think the biggest question it raises for me is, why would someone go to their state government website to get this information? And if you kind of squint, you can see why it exists. Like maybe there was an initiative to encourage people to improve their oral hygiene, right? There's a kind of idea there of helpfulness somewhere, right? But it's a really good example of like a piece of content just being published that doesn't have an impact, doesn't have a purpose, doesn't actually really have an audience, but the publishing of it kind of helps you check off something, but it represents in a single page some of the problems that emerge when we don't create boundaries about what can and can't go on our websites, because this fluff, of which there were thousands and thousands of pages, interferes with your wayfinding. It interferes with your overall kind of content coherence when it comes to kind of AI tools. And it's also just not very helpful. And it's just part of the content debt that you have to manage. So how did we create these boundaries? The first thing that we did is we went through the top 2,000 pages of the website and we did a kind of user needs audit. Yes, Dan, the beekeeping example is another really good example of that if you want to share in the chat. But yes, so we went through and we basically synthesized through the top 2,000 pages. We extracted a bunch of kind of like user needs. We're like, what are these actually functioning to do? What is the purpose of this information? And we synthesized that down to 8 major jobs to be done. And we took those jobs to be done to stakeholders and workshop them to make sure we weren't kind of missing key things. And off of the back of that, we created a proposition. So the proposition statement, which is inspired by GovUK, if anyone's seen the GovUK proposition, is basically a series of commitments, public-facing commitments, as to what kind of tasks and information you can expect to be supported by this site. What this allows us to do is a couple of things. It allows us to look from a very kind of central place as to what all of the content is going to need to support. So that's like really important. It actually allows us to look at the lens of those 10,000 pages and have some really clear rules as to whether or not it should be there or not. But it also allows us to think about design from the perspective of those proposition statements. How does what we do support those statements? So a couple of examples of ones there are things like apply for or manage government support and financial assistance, make or manage payments to the government, apply for or manage official documents and records issued by the government. Each one of these had a page as well of information about that statement and examples of the kind of information that would be provided. This was super, super helpful. And why it works is because there is super clear guidance as to what can and can't be published on the website. There is now something that they can point to and say, if it doesn't support one of these things, it doesn't support it. There was also some statements on there which are guidance on what can and can't be published. And one of the principles for that guidance is we only publish information for which we are the highest authority source. And what that meant is that we could say, we believe that when it comes to brushing your teeth, there are higher authority sources than the government as to the best way to do that. The Dental Association of Australia or something else, you know, it would be within the government's authority to say, you know, this is a trustworthy, reliable organisation to go to for dental health information, but not the actual dental health information itself. So these principles meant that anyone should be able to, for the most part, kind of run content through those principles and understand whether or not it was within proposition and should go on the website. Okay, so you've been hearing from me for ages, so I'm going to hand over to Emma now, and she is going to talk to you a little bit more about the rest of these. So there you go.
Thank you so much, McGee. Off the back of the proposition statement, we, kind of were able to define the needs that the users had, and then that allowed us to define the types of information that we needed to support those needs. And I'm sure many of you are used to working with user needs when you're creating content, and I'm sure that you can appreciate that a government website meets thousands of individual user needs. But what we found, which we thought was really cool, was that there were strong, kind of consistent and persistent patterns in those user needs and in what citizens kind of needed and expected from their government. And so with this insight, we use an object-oriented UX approach that McGee mentioned earlier, where we identified the information patterns in a way that was grounded in intent and meaning, rather than just kind of basing them on page patterns. So the way that we did this was by collecting like a truckload of user needs through auditing, desk research, things like social listening, stakeholder workshops, and things like that. And then what we did was we grouped user needs into clusters. And from those clusters, we were able to identify these semantic patterns that could work at a system level rather than just working at a page level. And so this meant that we could work at scale across the whole website rather than meeting individual user needs page by page, which is what we might be used to doing in content. So once we had identified those semantic patterns, we then codified them as information types in an information model. And just to expand on kind of object-oriented UX or OOUX, as McGee touched on earlier, it's quite helpful to kind of understand the kind of sort of philosophy behind it to understand kind of how we arrived at this these information types and this information model. So Sophia Prater is from the US. She developed OOUX, borrowing from object-oriented programming. And basically, it uses the principle of human psychology that we make sense of the world around us through objects. So, you walk into a room and see, or an office space, and you see a desk, a chair, a computer. Those things kind of are signifiers for the kind of space that you're in, what is available to you, and how you can interact in that space. So we took this sort of philosophy and we adapted it to the information objects that were in this state government world. And what we found were things like a topic summary, a topic overview, laws and rules, service summary, guidance, alert, news, all of these kind of information objects that were consistent throughout the ecosystem. So each of these information types were then, we were able to map back to the proposition statements that McGee introduced to you. And it meant that every information type supported those commitments that the website made to its citizens. We were then also able to group information types into information classes that were based on their purpose. So, for example, wayfinding, guiding, functional, and broadcast information classes. So this is effective because it means that everybody has a universal reference point for the types of information that we provide. And it means that users can easily identify information that aligns with what they're looking for and what they need to complete their task. It also means that AI can understand the intent of different pieces of information. It can better understand their context and how they connect. And this means that it can return more relevant results. Once we had identified those information types, we then worked on creating consistent structures for 15 of them, 15 priority ones. And to do this, again, we used object-oriented UX methods, and we identified patterns in attributes across information. So we wanted to figure out what are the chunks of information that keep coming up, whether a user needs a birth certificate or a driver's license. What fundamentally made a rule a rule, or what fundamentally made a service. And this kind of deep dive formed the basis for developing an anatomy for each of these information types. And that anatomy took the form of page patterns and content patterns that I'll show you in a sec. A really important part of this process was developing exemplar content. And that was really critical because we needed to ground these in real content. We needed to make sure that these patterns were robust enough to work across different areas of the website rather than just individual pages. So to give you a bit of an example, we created 12 page patterns And really these they serve as a single source of truth for people to follow to create content with consistent purpose and structure. And kind of the approach for these was really influenced by the idea of encapsulated content, which is a term coined by our lovely colleague Angus. And basically the idea of these page patterns is to like encapsulate the content that a user needs to complete their task. So what that means is it's got clear purpose, it has clear boundaries, and it feels like enough. So we want users to feel confident that they have what they need to without having to keep looking somewhere else for something that they might have missed. To make this, again, really robust and scalable, wherever we could, the page patterns were made up of reusable content patterns. So in this example, you can see the kind of page header pattern or the little in short pattern that gives the TLDR. And both of these patterns in particular actually were really useful to provide users and AI with like really important context and kind of orientation for the information that they could find on that page. So kind of in essence, these information patterns were designed around the consistent chunks of content that a user actually needs to complete their task. And it means that for every laws and rules page on the site, whether that might be for, you know, surrogacy or driving a truck or fencing a pool or whatever it might be, a user will know what they must do, what they can't do, and where, you know, any exceptions or special circumstances apply. As another example, whether someone needs a birth certificate or they need a driver's license, the service summary page will tell them who can use that service, how to do it, how long it takes, and how much it costs. So these are semantic page patterns, and that means that they're based on purpose, not layout or aesthetics. And the purpose is really baked into the name. It tells you why to use the page pattern based on its meaning and the purpose, you know, for a user. It tells you how that page pattern actually serves the person reading it. And the other really cool thing is the patterns mean that AI doesn't have to interpret each page from scratch. So it can rely on kind of the structure being consistent across hundreds of pages of different pieces of information, which means that retrieval is more consistent and reliable at scale because the information is not structured page by page, but pattern by pattern or information type by information type. So it's really important to kind of it's really important that these patterns aren't just a visual layer that go on top of existing content, but really they work as a classification system. They define what type of information something is, they define what a user needs from it, and how it should behave consistently across a website or the ecosystem. Information isn't reformatted, it's reclassified. And the topic overview pattern, which you can see here, I think really demonstrates the power of this really nicely. Basically what it does is it collects the service, the guidance, and the tools together for a topic to help a user understand what is available to them. So I find it really helpful to think about this like a menu in a restaurant. A menu clearly presents you with kind of all of the entrees, all of the mains, all of the desserts, and drinks. So like that, it clearly presents a user with all of the information and the services that the government has to offer on that particular topic. So if you need something related to marriage, it's all here. It's also clear what type of information is available to you. And it means you don't need to look anywhere else. There's no information hiding in another corner of the website, or, there's no service that you can only access from somewhere that you haven't discovered yet. This is what's on offer. This works because it means that patterns for different types of user needs are handled at a job level, not a page level. And this it provides this missing level of fidelity and meaning between a standard page CMS template and like UI components. I'm sure that is a gap that many of us have felt when designing content. It also means that users have like this comprehensive, reliable source of truth, and they have a consistent experience when they're accessing information and services across different areas. And this is also really useful for AI. It means that AI can retrieve and represent information reliably at scale. And it means that like a CMS can be built in a structured way to support meaning more than just supporting visual presentation. So it really works on so many levels. So finally, we brought all of our thinking together, documented in a central source of truth. And this example that we worked on was documented in Zero Height. And it works to pull everything, all of the systems thinking together in one place. So what it includes, amongst other things, is the proposition in all of its detailed glory, with all of those kind of just examples and details that McGee touched on. It also includes detailed guidance for each page pattern and each content pattern. So it tells you, it breaks down the anatomy, it explains kind of the purpose, the proposition statement that statements that each page pattern supports, the user needs they meet, and there's also kind of visual examples and prototypes in there as well, where they were helpful. And then it also provided guidance on creating content for various use cases, such as, a new campaign or initiative, for example. And then, as we would expect, it also houses the style guide that was already in use in the organization. So the reason that this works is because there are clear and agreed guidelines, rules, and frameworks all in one central source. It's this really lovely scalable system that can grow and evolve as teams and organizations mature and change. It empowers everyone across the organization to create the right content in the right place, in the right way, and to do that consistently, efficiently, and effectively. Where this documentation might live probably depends on the tools your organization is using and how much your organization is using AI. And we believe that it will increasingly be in machine readable formats. But regardless of kind of how and where it lives, this documentation is really integral to being able to effectively manage and control your organization's body of content. It becomes the official home of all of the definitions and all of the decisions made about the structure of your content. So we get very excited about this. We see so much opportunity here. And to give you a bit of an example of kind of what this has meant for our government clients team, the content design system we created with them has kind of given them the springboard to be able to transform those 10,000 Snowflake pages into content that is consistent and predictable, which is an absolutely mammoth job, as I'm sure you can appreciate. but they have really been, taking some huge strides in doing this. So since launching the content design system, they've used it to roll out a patterned structured approach to transforming all of that content across other areas of the site. And the really impressive thing is that they've been able to do this with incredible consistency across, multiple, many different types of content, many different areas of content, and different content writers, different teams. It's really amazing, actually. They've also been able to extend the content design system with other information types. So as you can imagine, getting into different areas, new needs emerge. But they have been able to kind of use the foundations that we created to develop new page patterns to serve new needs. The UX team as well have used the content patterns as content requirements to design new purpose-built components for the existing design system. And the content team's also been able to use AI tools to speed up the process of content mapping and developing information architecture because of those repeatable patterns. The cool thing about this documentation is that they now have that kind of structure to get AI tools to help them create content efficiently and consistently with that context and those rules. So we see content design systems as like this really key layer in an organization's knowledge stack now. And it provides the inputs and the structure to create quality content at scale. It kind of becomes this like documented evidence-based source of truth about your content. And it's grounded in what is meaningful to users and the business. But it's also structured in a way that AI can reliably interpret and retrieve. It's the explicit semantic structure that gives you the control over how content is created, how it is retrieved, and how it is experienced for both people and machines. Basically, it lets you handle many pieces of the same type of information in the same way, and that means that you can put proper guardrails around them. With the foundations of a content design system in place, we kind of have this amazing vision of organizations being able to connect the dots between different systems with something that we call an experience system. And kind of how this could work is by bringing together service design patterns, an existing kind of design system, the content design system and content model together in this holistic, connected framework that teams can use to create really cohesive digital customer experiences. But it would give teams across like CX, service design, UX and UI, content strategy, content design, information architecture, all a shared view to create really consistent and user-centered digital experiences, which I think is super exciting prospect. So to close, think back to where we started. Everything is changing and nothing is changing. AI is mediating how people find information. Government and other websites keep getting more complex, and that unstructured content problem has become everyone's problem and not just content people's problem anymore. Hooray. We really believe that the organizations that will come out ahead will be the ones whose content AI can read and interpret accurately. And it'll be able to do that because it's structured, consistent, and classified in a way that is grounded in meaning. But the ones that don't will find that their information is deprioritized, it's misrepresented, or it's just invisible. It's not shown at all. So you can't fix the internet. You can't control exactly what AI does with your content, but you can control the quality, consistency, and the structure of the content that you do create. And this is what we think content design systems need to be. It's not just a style guide, but it's this critical infrastructure layer. And they can help you capture and classify your content at its like most elemental level in this way that is centralized and shared across the organization. That takes rigor, yes, but it also allows form to follow function. And it massively pays off in consistent user-centered experiences, more effective content creation, and content that is genuinely ready for whatever comes next. So today, take away with you design for meaning and structure or scale. We want to say a very massive thank you to the incredible team that we worked with on this work. We are truly grateful for the wonderful client team that we partnered with. We couldn't have done this without their trust. This is, you know where to find us. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to stop sharing.
Well, yeah, what we might do. Thanks so much, Emma and McGee. That was amazing, and yeah, lots of comments, lots of it stimulated lots of thinking. One person says it makes them want to go back and work in government again, which is lovely to hear. What we might do is do the announcements now because we are close to the hour, and then if you guys don't mind staying around for a few extra minutes, maybe take some questions afterwards, give you a chance to catch your breath as well. So I'll just reshare my screen. If you, as I said before, if you have anything you'd like to share with the community, feel free to put it into your chat or put up your hand. Elle Garrity has already, thanks Elle, already pasted a couple of things in that she has coming up. So a workshop, a content strategy training workshop next week. Elle's training as always. We always hear the best things about. So if you've got time next week, slot yourself into that one, and then the in-person Sydney Content Strategy meetup in a couple of weeks, which I can also highly recommend as an experience. So I'll keep an eye on the chat and anybody's hands up, but I'm also going to share a couple of things from us. We are planning to have a lightning talks session we're not sure exactly when, but it will be before the end of the year. So if you've always wanted to sort of share something with the meetup, but you don't feel like you want to commit yourself to a full-length talk. If it's something that will fit nicely into 10 minutes, we would love to have you do that. So something you've been working on, a new idea you want to share, anything that's innovative, interesting, or unexpected, especially if you don't have a lot of experience speaking, please come along. Please volunteer. So you can do that at that URL there, or just get in touch with us. As many of you know, we deliver training in Australia that is designed by Content Design London. Our next course coming up will be working with Gen AI, which is in a couple of weeks. That one, sorry to be salesy, but that one is selling fast. I think there's 5 tickets left as of this moment. So if you're interested in that one, make sure you get onto that quickly. We also have Content Design in Action coming up in September, and then the original Content Design Fundamentals course. The next one we'll be running will be February next year. So plan early for that one. All the details are on our website for that. You'll be able to find this talk plus all of our past talks on our YouTube channel. So make sure you like and subscribe to that one. YouTube.com/@wearecontentsd. Our next meetup is going to be the wonderful Melissa Voderberg. So there'll be an announcement coming out about the exact sort of topic and title for that one in the next few days. So just watch, make sure you're signed up to the meetup, and you'll get that notification. And the Good People at Button conference, which, as probably many of you know, is probably the world's best known conference for content designers. It's an online conference, and they have been kind enough to give us a discount code. So if you would like to sign up for that, you can use the code WEARE100 for $100 off an individual pass. And a lot of friends are involved in that conference, including Tori Podrzewski, who you can see in the photo there. So that's our announcement. I'm not sure if we have any other announcements there. Doesn't look like it.
There's any, but if anyone is a Western Australian-based content designer, hit me up on LinkedIn, because there is going to be roles coming soon that I will be able to let you know about, or follow me on LinkedIn and I'll make sure I announce them when they happen.
Amazing. Thanks, McGee. So I can see, a lot of comments. So McGee and Emma's talk has stimulated a lot of thoughts. I'm not going to read out all the individual comments, but there are some questions in there that I'd love to get McGee and Emma to address. So one was from Megan, which was, we struggle with mountains of content that need to be on our internal site for compliance reasons. Keen to hear any thoughts about how to deal with that sort of scenario in a system context. So the kind of content that you're required to publish that might not be clearly meeting a user need. How does that fit into our content design system?
Do you want to take that one, Emma, or do you want me to?
I feel like you can take that one, Vicky.
Okay, compliance. So I mean, when you look at the classes of content, there's a reason that we put content classes in there, and that's because we think that in addition to the individual patterns, there are patterns in classes of content and why they're different. And one of the classes of content we had identified was like an institutional class and also a functional class. To me, compliance content probably sits within that like institutional class, because it's that information that is kind of belonging, it's of the institution, it has to be published, it generally doesn't get used other than for transparency reasons. But what you can do is then the value of having those classes is you can create rules around how classes are treated, how they're prioritized, whether or not they're like crawlable, whether or not you're going to create custom templates for them. You have to have them, but it's always just about like, if a lot of this thinking is about stepping up a level and going like, let's stop thinking about does this page do a job, and think about how do we manage the set of user needs which are related to compliance, because there is user needs there, even if that user need is just I am the auditor who has to check that exists, that's still a user need. And can we scale our solution to that across 1,000 pages instead of just one?
Thanks, McGee. Yeah.
It's probably not. Yeah.
I might just, McGee, you've already answered it in the chat, but I might just repeat the question from Sharon. The experience design system that Emma showed towards the end there, was that meant to be a conceptual representation of all the components, or some sort of literal system? So I don't know if one of you would like to just maybe clarify what the experience design system is or could be in your kind of vision.
I'll kick off and then Emma can cap it, but I would say that it's the idea behind an experience. So very often we're managing different systems, and each different system is taking its own approach to what customer experience should be through the lens of that discipline. However, we're all creating a customer experience, and very often content gets brought in at the end to be like, hey, we've designed the box, we've designed the service, now can you put some words in? But so often, one of the reasons we're so focused on meaning is because it is in the words that the meaning is created. And we as writers and content people often really deeply have to understand something so that we can write about it. So connecting the system is actually about saying, what are the information, what are the tasks, the service journeys that people are completing, what is the information needed to support that journey, what are then the information types you need to create, what then is the UI that you create to support those information types, and then at a more structural level, which is why we have a layer that's for structured content, what are the pieces of that structure that need to sit across the system? What are the taxonomies that need to go between, platforms, between your logged in versus your not logged in? What are the schemas that you're going to use across those different things? So like the idea behind it is not that it's like one the documentation doesn't matter, it's the thinking that matters. The documentation matters a lot, but like it's just a way of capturing your thinking, basically. But yeah, I'm sure you've got stuff to add to that.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I would say all of those things make up organizations have all of these different teams with different systems that they're using to solve the same problems in different ways. But a user only has one kind of overarching user experience. They engage with all of those different things, and if those things are not talking to each other or they're inconsistent, what the user experiences is really disjointed. We were actually super lucky in doing this work to be able to collaborate not just with an incredible content team, but also the design team, the UX UI design team, and service design team as well. And what that allowed us to do was to kind of think about the user experience up a level rather than just in those kind of design silos, and actually identify, well, there might be a particular pain point, but that actually you can't address in content. You actually need to address it in the service kind of journey, or actually that piece of information is best communicated in an email, in a confirmation email after they submit the form, or something like that, rather than like on the website, on the page on the website. So I think that idea of kind of bringing these disparate systems together into one kind of cohesive view of the kind of customer experience, or the user experience, is a really powerful kind of way of more effectively solving those pain points that we all experience.
Fabulous. Thanks, Emma. We might just have one last question. And this one came from Annie. I think it's an interesting one. I'm working through a lot of technical SEO/AEO pieces at the moment, trying to upgrade our content to be more crawlable for LLMs. Would you see a content design system as part of that, or sitting alongside, or content architecture, I guess? Which one would you prioritize if you could only do one? So how does this all fit into SEO and AEO?
It's so connected, but you can't kind of answer that question without kind of knowing the situation that you're in, right? And what the barriers are. The kind of transformation we're talking about here does involve touching all of your content to some extent, because what you're doing is you're classifying everything and you're trying to create consistency. This is about leveling the work. This is about creating structure for the future, right? And it's not a small piece of work, it's a really big piece of work. So in terms of prioritization, you have to prioritize stuff that's going to be impactful today if you're having issues. But I think that how you are going to be optimized for AEO and SEO is going to be through this type of work, because coming back to we have two issues. One is AI systems being able to understand what we've created and return meaningful answers. The other, though, is about our control over AI tooling that we have. And that is so much going to be about creating structure that we can control around parameters that we care about. So, you know, being able to say, we only want you to return answers that come from rules and laws content when this type of answer is, you know, this type of question is asked, that kind of level of structure means touching every page that could be it. In this case, we had to take pages and explode them out, and you know, you'd have a service page and it would be some would have rules and laws and others would have, so you have to like do all of this like foundational kind of content work to get them separated. So I think that they're just really interconnected, basically. But it's big work. And if you have to do, if you've got technical barriers to kind of AEO and SEO stuff, you probably want to get them sorted ASAP, because this will take a while probably.
Great, thanks, McGee. Okay, we might leave it there. As someone asked before, this talk will be up on the YouTube channel. So if you feel like you need to watch it again to pick up on the bits you missed, you can do that, or you can share it with a colleague who might benefit from it. We will also, someone also asked about the slides, so we may need to redact some content in the slides, but we will share. It'll be shared in some format, whether it's slides or some other format. Some of the more kind of more detailed stuff that McGee and Emma shared in the talk, we will make sure that that gets out there in some way. So thank you, everyone, and we will hopefully see you next month. Adelaide people, I hope you're enjoying your lunch, and enjoy the rest of your meetup. You get to actually have a chat, which is fantastic. It's what we miss from the old days. So wonderful to have you here. Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.